The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Wednesday, the 3rd of December 2025, and we today are going to talk about whooping cough. And no one's better than that than Dr. Suzanne Humphries. Good morning, Dr. Suzanne Humphries.
Hello, good morning, Polly Tommey. How are you doing today?
We're doing okay. Now, this is important. I'm glad we're talking about this because it's all over the headlines. Let's bring up some headlines on this. Whooping cough cases elevated in the US. The third Kentucky infant dies. Third infant has died in the past 12 months, more than 560 cases this year. Vaccinations urged, and primarily pregnant women and infants are there telling to get the vaccine. Well, we disagree, wholly disagree on this, Dr. Suzanne Humphries. Where to start on this? First of all, they're calling these children that they say have died from whooping cough unvaccinated. Well, we know from being on the bus, we know from COVID, that unvaccinated means nothing. I mean, you can just be not up to date on what they call up to date and you're unvaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, if you look around on the internet, the Mockingbird program is quite obvious because everybody's really saying the exact same thing. The messages are that children died of whooping cough. That's number one. Number two, they were babies. Number three, they were not vaccinated. Number four, their mothers weren't vaccinated. And number five is that everybody must get vaccinated, including all the parents and the grandparents and anybody who's going to have access to the baby. And, you know, you said in the beginning that nobody knows more about whooping cough than I do. And there are actually a lot of professors of vaccinology who have been delving into the whooping cough issue for decades upon decades, who have quite startling things to say about the efficacy of the vaccines and how they don't work. So I have a few questions to start with, though. First off is, I would really like to know the age of the infants that were supposedly died of whooping cough. I would like to know if they were old enough to be vaccinated, i.e. 2 months old. I would like to know the background history of the pregnancy and the birth, and if there are any birth defects. And thirdly, I'd like to know how the hospital attempted to treat these infants, what they did to them. Because as far as I'm concerned, there's almost always a background story there. Because the fact of the matter is that whooping cough, well, you know, the funny thing is I don't even know, quite frankly, where to start because there's so much information that I've had to go through over the past 17 years when I've been studying vaccination. And even in our new edition of Dissolving Illusions, the 10th anniversary edition, we added several more, I'm going to guess we probably added about 20 new pages to the whooping cough chapter because so much more information has come out, and the information does not support this ideology of vaccinating babies or vaccinating mothers. The science, if you want to follow the science, shows that if you vaccinate mothers, you're actually limiting the ability of the infant's B cells that make antibody to do their work. We've known this for a long time. We also, it's just, the thing is, it's so complicated. The entire situation is complicated. So if you want, I probably ought to go back. Let's go. I prepared some slides. So should we do that? Should we go through some of the information? Okay. So Lou, if you just would like to bring up the first slide. And these all, pretty much all of them either come from the Dissolving Illusions whooping cough chapter or from my paper on the vitamin C treatment of whooping cough. And people should know that that is available for free on my website, drsuzanne.net. And not only is the full, I think it's a 25-page article that I wrote, which you really need to read all 25 pages and not be lazy, because there's a lot of valuable information in there besides just the protocol that you have to know. But there's also a tab on my website of testimonials from parents over the past couple of, I guess, 15 years or so, who have used the vitamin C protocol and given the report of what they found. And I always ask parents, I say, just don't talk about me. I don't want to be a hero here. I want you to talk about the vitamin C and what you saw in your own hands when you followed the vitamin C protocol. And that's what they wrote. And after a while, I got bored of it and I stopped adding the testimonials because there were just so many of them. And I just get letters from all over the world from people who have used it without my help, and it did help them. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning now. What people really should realize is that there's two different types of whooping cough vaccines. The original one was what we call a whole cell vaccine, which had the entire bacteria in the vaccine, and it was inactivated. And it caused such horrible side effects, autism and encephalopathies. Whole books were written about the toxicity of it. And in some countries, the vaccine was deemed to be absolutely not worth it because the side effects were much higher than the problems from whooping cough itself, or the death rate. So if you go to the first slide there, you can see this is a graph that we got. This is a new graph that's not in the old version. And this shows Sweden's whooping cough deaths from 1861 to 2018. And again, take note that the death rate was quite high back in the early days when, you know, the background of humanity was not exactly as robust as it is today. And you'll see that around maybe the 1930s that the death rate starts to go down, and then in the 40s even more, and then by 1953 you see it's hugging baseline. It stays at baseline. Now, more importantly, let's go to the next slide, which shows you an interesting thing, which is in Sweden, the vaccine program was halted from 1979 to 1995, all right? And here in that area that's shown in the small graph inside the larger graph, you can see what went on there. And you can see that between 79 and 95, that the death rates did not go up. And after the vaccine was brought in, the acellular vaccine, which is the one that we use today, which does not actually induce as strong of an immune response, but is deemed to be safer. Although if you talk to Carrie Bundy, she'll tell you how safe that vaccine is because she's got a tombstone to show you exactly how safe that vaccine was for her child. So anyway, the new vaccine, it's a variable vaccine. So to say the child is not vaccinated, blah, 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 well, just know that the vaccines differ in what's in them. They will always have something called a toxoid in them, which is an inactivated form of the toxin that the pertussis bacteria produces. And some of them will have something called filamentous hemagglutinin or pertactin in them as well. And some of them might even have fimbriae, other things. But the contents vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. So there's science for you and there's consistency for you. So let's go to slide 3. And let's look at the United States incidence by year from 1980 to 2010. And again, here we have, you know, in the era of using this acellular vaccine, what do we see? This is incidence now. Remember, before what we were looking at in Sweden was the death rates. Okay, so now we are looking at incidence, and the incidence has gone up. And if you go to the next slide, as you know, New Zealand is dear to my heart, and New Zealand has a lot to say about the particular waves that come in terms of incidence. And this comes from the 2020 New Zealand Immunization Handbook. And you can see these are cases, okay? These are notifications. The hospitalizations are gray, the notifications are in blue, and you can see the notifications going up. And pertussis does come in waves, and every time one of those waves comes, just like with measles, the media mockingbirds take full advantage of it. So here we are in 2019 at the end of this graph, and now we're in 2025. Yeah, we're pretty much due for a wave right now of whooping cough. And so you can see that the hospitalizations and the article that came with this just basically stated that the vaccines are really doing nothing to stop the spread of the disease. Okay, next slide, slide number 5. If we look at this one, this is really interesting. So this is California between 1946 and 2014. And you can see where the acellular vaccine was introduced around 1998. And whoa, look, lo and behold, you have an increase in cases being reported over and over again because the vaccine is ineffective for many reasons, which I'll get into in a minute. But if you were to try and go and find further data on this, you won't, because they basically shut it down. Okay, now slide 6. Again, this is also in the protocol that I wrote for the vitamin C treatment. So these images will be in there. And what this is showing us is just 1 year, 2010. And the point of this is that many of the children who were reported to have had pertussis had 6 doses of vaccine. If you look in the green off to the right, the yellow, it denotes 5 doses, and the orange denotes 1 to 4 doses. Now note, starting from the left, you're looking at very young children, and then it's by age on the x-axis goes up to age 18. So plenty of cases reported with numerous vaccines because the vaccine is highly ineffective, and it's becoming more and more ineffective as time goes on. So let's go to the next slide, because this image was made by us for our book, the new edition, but it comes out of a very well-respected medical journal, and we just adapted it so that we wouldn't have copyright issues. But what this is showing is that before the vaccines were introduced, we had a situation much like what we had with measles, where the children that are not infants would have developed the whooping cough. They would have developed a natural infection. Their lungs would have been stimulated, which is really important. And then, yes, they would have got some blood immunity as well. And then they would have gone on to be adolescents and adults, later exposed to whooping cough by other children, because let's face it, whooping cough is everywhere. And then they would keep getting their stimulation that way. And then when they became mothers, if they're females, then they would be able to transfer antibodies to their babies. And then the babies wouldn't get whooping cough for the first couple of months of life, which is the time when you really have to worry the most, because A, you can't vaccinate them even if you believe the vaccine works, and B, even with the vitamin C treatment, I have treated babies as young as 2 weeks. I've treated 2 of them. One of them died and one of them lived. And then, so that was kind of the natural cycle. Now let's cut to the vaccination era, which is at the bottom half. And what we see is that those children that are the most susceptible in terms of dying or hospitalization are now the most susceptible to the actual bacteria, because we have skewed the immunity in the population. So now those older children that were vaccinated will develop whooping cough again. Or if they're vaccinated a lot, they might not cough, but they'll colonize their lung surfaces and be able to spread the bacteria asymptomatically. And I'll show you the evidence for that in a minute. So we've created a flustercluck basically with this vaccine, same as we did with measles. And so in the next slide, I just clipped a couple of quotes out of Dissolving Illusions. And these are, very well-respected scientists. In 2000, Weingart said that there was no evidence that acellular vaccines promoted antibody-dependent killing by complement or enhanced phagocytosis by neutrophils, and basically saying that booster immunization of adults with these acellular vaccines wasn't found to increase bactericidal activity over pre-immunization levels. Identifying ways to promote bactericidal immune responses might improve the efficacy. Okay, good luck with that. And they also talk about the unvaccinated convalescent children who basically would get the disease, and then they would look at the antibodies that they developed. IgG1 and IgG3 were prevalent, and that's good. Whereas children that were vaccinated with 2 different types of vaccines, acellular vaccines, had a skewed array of antibodies to include IgG4 antibodies, which is very problematic. And I'll get into why that's problematic in a minute. And so next slide, slide 9, shows us a really stunning article from 2017, which wasn't in the original. I couldn't talk about this in the original book because we published it in 2013. So a lot has come out since then. And this doctor basically goes through, well, what's wrong with the vaccine immunity. And so he's basically saying that the immune response pattern, remember I just talked about that IgG4, IgG4 is produced massively in vaccinated people. So the more vaccines you get, the more IgG4 you get. Well, IgG4 is, immunologists love this, like allergy specialists, because that causes anergy, meaning you don't respond anymore. So say you have an allergy to bees and you get allergy shots, where your IgG4 levels can go up. And that's good because that's going to stop you from responding to the bees. It's not good when you're talking about trying to induce some sort of immune response using an injectable. Not good at all. So the next slide, slide 11, he says point blank that repeated booster doses of acellular vaccine in acellular prime children generate more antigen-specific IgG4, greater THT skewing, you don't want that, and much higher avidity than acellular boosters in whole cell prime children. So they're basically saying that if your first vaccine was an acellular vaccine, which is what we've been using now since 98, that you have a progressive loss of protection, and you can't overcome that. Even if you're exposed to the natural bacteria, you're not going to overcome that. So basically, the people that have been primed with this acellular vaccine are the ones that are going to continue to interrupt herd immunity until that population is gone. And I don't know when that will be, because they're giving it to pregnant women, they're giving it to babies. So we're a long time away from those people not being on the earth anymore. So we have created an absolute disaster situation with these vaccines. The next slide, slide 12, is just a schematic that came out of the article, and it shows you that IgG4 down on the bottom. So the next slide, slide 12. There. Yeah, so again, you could do a replay on this if you want to see more of this, or you can order the article yourself. So slide 13, again, Divatopoulos says these findings suggest that repetitive acellular vaccination may lead to early exhaustion of cellular immunity. Now, we have cellular immunity and we have antibody immunity. So the antibody immunity is the one, your IgG1, IgG4. Cellular immunity is basically your T cells, the ones that are your frontline defense, and they become exhausted the more vaccines that you get. So I'm not making this up. So the next slide is a quote from another expert. This is just a clip from our book. I just went through this morning real fast, taking some clips out. And Dr. James Cherry has been an expert for a very long time. He says, because of linked epitope suppression, now you should know that this is in the past been called original antigenic sin, and there are other words for it, but they say that all children who are primed by acellular vaccines, that primed means that your first vaccine was that one, will be more susceptible to pertussis throughout their lifetimes, and there's no easy way to decrease this increased lifetime susceptibility. So slide 15, just giving you a summary that today's pertussis vaccines, they're unnecessary because the mortality rate fell almost 100% before the vaccination programs began. Now, I didn't say the incidence rate, I said the mortality rate. The 1970s in Sweden did not decrease. So the suspension of the vaccination did not increase deaths from pertussis. So we have a real live experiment that happened, that the vaccines impair meaningful herd immunity, as I'll get into that, and I think I have a slide on that. Yeah, that's coming up later. They can't eradicate whooping cough, which is why eradication is never even discussed in terms of whooping cough, okay? Eradication or even elimination, it's everywhere. And I have had some mothers contact me saying that they were unable to get the doctor to do a test, and that usually will happen in children who have been vaccinated, that the doctors will be unwilling to do it. So you really have to push to get tests done. The vaccine cannot prevent transmission. In fact, it makes the vaccinated people are more likely to transmit the bacteria either symptomatically or asymptomatically than the non-vaccinated that have had a natural infection. And that is because of the lung surface and what happens there, which we'll get into in a minute. The vaccines provide defective and limited personal protection. And more importantly, and this part, I guess it upsets me more than anything, is that the acellular vaccines, because they, just like when you have an antibiotic that you take for a long time, that the body can, I should say the bacteria can outsmart it the longer that you take the antibiotic. Well, the longer that these types of ineffective vaccines that are given, the longer they're given and the more doses that are given, the same thing happens in the human body, is that you'll induce mutants. And some of these mutants have been well documented to have higher invasive capacity. I mean, they're much more problematic than they were, say, back in the 1920s, the bacteria that was around then. So we've created these mutants, and now we'll say, oh, it's because of the unvaccinated. Well, actually, no, the mutants have evolved, and this has been very well shown, that it evolved because of the vaccines, not because of people that haven't vaccinated. The people that haven't vaccinated and developed normal, natural whooping cough are the ones that are protecting the herd the most. Okay. Now, the next slide just gives you a summary of vaccine versus natural immunity. The vaccine only has parts of the bacteria in it, and they can't put some of the parts that are the most important, like adenylate cyclase would be a really important thing to put in the vaccine. They've tried to do that, and they've been unable to. Natural immunity gives you the full spectrum of the bacteria, it gives you all the toxins that are produced, and so you get to respond in a broad fashion, and you get to respond at the lung surface, not in a muscle in the blood compartment, which doesn't do very much at all. So that's a big difference. So the vaccine produces lots and lots of antibody, but the antibody turns out to be the wrong shape, because what they did to the pertussis toxin, to call it a toxoid, is that I believe they used formalin, and it actually changed it, what they call the conformation, the shape of it, so that the body doesn't respond very well to it at all. And again, that's been very well described, and we put that into the book. So when you have natural immunity, your T cells are going to be doing a lot of the work, and that's really much more desirable. That's what we call the Th1 arm. The trolls love when I say that. Okay, so when it comes to vaccine immunity, you get this IgG2 and IgG4, which dampens your cell immunity. When you have natural immunity, you get IgG1 and IgG3, which is the best way to do it. And vaccine Th2 arm, natural immunity Th1. Vaccine gives you what's called original antigenic sin, meaning that you're always going to respond the same to whatever your first interaction with whether it's a vaccine or whether it was a bacteria. And the vaccine and the natural infection does not do that. Again, so the next slide is just giving you another reference, and this is by Smallridge from 2014. And again, this was after the first edition, so it's only in the second edition. And they summarize by saying that there's a resurgence of whooping cough due to two deficiencies in the vaccine, that it fails to protect the vaccinated individual from infection. It may blunt the severity of the disease, which is basically the big flag that the pro-vaccine zealots want to wave, and ignoring all this other stuff. And failure to prevent does not prevent transmission. And they said that they were surprised to determine that an acellular vaccine previously found to affect pathology and colonization of the lungs was ineffective at inhibiting shedding and transmission. Okay, so the next slide is Warfel. So this is a really important study. Warfel later published another study backing away from this, but sorry, you can't unring a bell. This was actually very well designed, very good study where they looked at baboons. And if you want to go to the next slide, slide 19, well, I'll show you what they did. So the blue line represents naive, meaning that these baboons had no experience with the vaccine or with the bacteria. The red line represents baboons that had the acellular pertussis vaccine. The black line, the whole cell pertussis vaccine, and the green line at the bottom are the baboons that had an experience with natural whooping cough bacteria and then recovered. So they took all those groups and then they exposed them to the pertussis, and then they watched what happened over time. And what they found was that at the bottom, the baboons that were convalesced, meaning the ones that had natural bacterial infection convalesced, when they were re-exposed to the bacteria, did not shed bacteria and did not get sick, okay? The whole cell pertussis came in next best, but they were still shedding and possibly even coughing up to day 21. The naive, meaning the ones that had never had any experience, like the infants that, just catch pertussis naturally, they would have coughed and shed up to day 38. And the acellular pertussis vaccinated were shedding and possibly asymptomatic up to day 42. So now you tell me, looking at that graph, who is providing better herd immunity? Vaccinated people or naturally convalesced? We need to get more naturally convalesced people into the so-called herd so that we can actually start protecting these infants like they were protected a long time ago. Okay, so why is this happening? If we go to slide 21, we're going to skip over 20, just go right to 21 there. We start talking about mutants, and I talked about that already a little bit, but this is just the proof that, so PRN is something called protactin, and it's a virulence factor, okay? And it is in some of the vaccines, and it is in none of the mutant strains. And you might think that's a good thing, that you don't have a virulence factor in the mutant strain, but it's not a good thing, because what that virulence factor does is it stimulates your body to respond. So it's basically making the bacteria even more stealth when you don't have that virulence factor in there. And so the mutant strains are missing that antigen, and that's the vaccine that you want to have proper antibody made to. And again, that's in Diavetopoulos 2017. Now you can say, okay, they're just mutants, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you go to the next slide, 22, Stefanelli in 2018, and he's not the only one, talked about how there's enhanced invasive ability of the PRN stands for protactin and negative. So that's PRN negative strain to invade and affect human dendritic cells. And they found that 5 hours after infection, the protactin negative strain significantly increased invasion ability. So this is what vaccinations have done for you. And in the next slide, we have more proof of that. In 2009, MOOI, M-O-O-I, again, that vaccination selects for increased virulence and indicates with, it's over and over again. It's not hard to prove this at all. The next slide from Salah Fareh in 2013, again, didn't make it into the first copy of the book, but they talk about, despite high levels of vaccination coverage, pertussis circulation cannot be controlled at all. Okay? So people need to just STFU about not being vaccinated being the cause of having problems. So the last slide, this is slide 25, basically summarizing that today's pertussis vaccines, the acellular vaccines, impair meaningful herd immunity. They cannot eradicate whooping cough. They cannot prevent transmission. They provide defective, limited personal protection. They yield to mutants that have higher invasive capacity. And if you want to talk to Carrie Bundy and other people like her, because she is not the only one out there, she was told by her doctor that if she did not give that vaccine to her 2-month-old baby, that baby would die of pertussis if it got infected. And so she complied, and that baby was dead within, I believe it was 48 hours. Okay. So she's a mother on fire. So you want to keep creating more anti-vaxxers? Go ahead. Keep up with your rhetoric. And that will be that.
Yeah, that was really informative. And again, people, you really need to get the Dissolving Illusions book. Now, where can they get it, Suzanne? They can get it on Amazon.
The best place to go is dissolvingillusions.com, because we have alternatives to Amazon now. It's been translated into 9 or 10 languages now, including simplified Chinese. And we'd much prefer that you go to the dissolvingillusions.com website, because it's got a lot of other information there, including how to contact both Roman and myself and our other books that we've written, and how to get the translations and the 3 different versions. What we have is the original, which you can still buy the original book. I don't know why you'd want to, but we have the updated 10th anniversary edition that was put out last year. And we have a companion book, which is, I think it's amazing. I wish we had another title for it, but the companion book is basically a lot of information that we weren't able to put in the original book. It's over 200 quotes from doctors over the past 200 years who regretted ever giving a vaccine. So the anti-vaccine movement was started as soon as vaccines were created. It was a big problem. Encyclopedia Britannica chapters, and difficult to obtain other literature, as well as a full timeline of vaccination.
And you can get it on video as well, right?
Yeah, so it's on Audible and it's also on Kindle.
Okay. And this is someone I highly recommend that everybody gives this book to the people in the family that are arguing with you. This is the way to shut them up. And if they still don't get it after reading Dissolving Illusions, then there's no hope.
Yeah, I mean, that pertussis chapter is so full of medical references that I can't, many doctors who don't have skin in the game anymore, like maybe they're retired or maybe they're plastic surgeons or neurosurgeons, usually surgeons, because they don't get a lot of income from vaccinating, but they write to me in quiet, in the dark, and say, I'm really happy you're doing what you're doing. I totally agree with you. Keep going. And I can't say it myself, but thank you for saying it. So there are lots of doctors out there who've been turned around by reading this book, as well as nurses and physical therapists and other medical professionals. So don't be afraid to put it in front of them, because you never know. While they might scoff at you initially, they might start to sniff around it later and maybe even open it up.
Let's talk about let's just summarize this up. The DTaP is what your children get. The TDAP is what the adults get, including the pregnant women. But here's the bottom line, I think, to what Dr. Suzanne Humphries is saying. And that is, if you think your pediatrician is giving you better advice than what you're hearing now, you're going to go, we're going to talk about, you're going to see Carrie Bundy's story in a minute. But this vaccine, this is truth. This is the people of America telling you this. We've traveled around on the bus. Actually, not just America, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. We've been to all these places and they all have the same story. So the DTaP that you give your child could kill your child. That's the bottom line. It could kill your child. SIDS reports coming in from those people, they had the DTaP. So you need to understand this vaccine can kill your child. Your pediatrician's not going to tell you that. If it doesn't kill your child, it could seriously injure your child to the point where it will be injured for the rest of its life, like Billy. And also, it will lower the immune system. So there is nothing in my mind good about putting the DTaP into you or your child. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely right. And it has a lot of aluminum in it, as well as other chemicals. So we need to consider that, as well as you're unlikely to just go into the pediatrician and just get a DTaP. You know, they're going to put other vaccines in at the same time, maybe even some fluoride onto the gum line. You know, they're just doing the craziest things right now. And the other thing I just want to emphasize is that there are treatments for whooping cough. It's not, and there are nutritional guidelines for whooping cough. And I go through all of that, including the azithromycin. I think there's a place for azithromycin in a very young baby who's at high risk. If you can catch it very early, azithromycin works quite well. Limiting the sugar intake during this infection is really important, because you need to keep the endotoxin production in the gut down to a minimum. And so some people are like giving their kids like lots of juice when they're, and even fruits, like you really got to keep that down to a bare minimum and use alternative sweeteners if you need to do that. So the vitamin C is so safe. It's actually safer than caffeine, which is actually used to resuscitate neonates after they vaccinate them for hepatitis B. And I go in through all the LD50s, the lethal dose needed for 50% of the animals to die of various substances in my vitamin C treatment of whooping cough article, which everybody should have a copy of. It's free, and it's really important either to prepare or to deal with it on the spot.
But also, Dr. Humphries, the whooping cough, people are afraid of whooping cough. It makes a horrible noise. And also the difference between whooping cough and croup, there is a difference, right?
Yeah, there is a difference. I mean, yeah, but the whooping cough, I'm very specific about this, that it generally is a 100-day cough. And when I saw my first few cases of whooping cough, I understood why the doctors and the powers that be wanted to create a vaccine against it. It's extremely unpleasant. I wish the vaccine worked. I wish that it was safe, because that would have been the easy way out. But I hate to tell you, that's not the case. So all babies don't hoop, and older children won't hoop. The hoop comes from the inspiration after they've coughed out and they're going to take a big breath, and kind of there's a suction that goes on in the airways. That if they're like, it's kind of like, a wind instrument, so to speak. So it does make this noise. The biggest problem is that babies can turn purple. They can have pooling of the mucus in the bottom of the lungs because the cilia, the hair cells, can be basically stripped off of the bronchial tree if you don't get to it very quickly, because there are toxins that basically rip those hair cells right. I mean, it's an evil bacteria. I am never denying that. But what happens when you treat it adequately and you get the nutrition right, and ideally there's breast milk involved, that what happens is the babies don't turn purple. You're able to get that mucus coming up. And that's the most important thing, is to get the mucus up, because if it sits there, that's when you can start to breed secondary infections. I've never once had somebody come to me after treatment saying that there was a secondary infection, because vitamin C is a really good defense against that. But antibiotics won't do that. And in fact, there's so many cases, and I've researched this thoroughly through the CDC's websites and various different medical articles, that the vaccines they tell you that, if you have the antibiotics, if you give the antibiotics, that you will no longer be a carrier. Well, that's not a hard and fast rule at all. There have been lots of children, both in my experience as well as the CDC's MMWR reports, where carriage continues and sickness continues even after giving the antibiotics. But if you get in there really early, it can have some effect, but it's not going to, unless you kill off all the bacteria, you're not going to stop that effect of stripping down that cilia that basically, it's a beating cilia that normally in us, or in me right now, just pushes mucus up and out rather than letting it sit inside of the lungs. And that's really what you want. So it's a very unpleasant situation. It can be terrifying. Babies can hold their breath. They can turn blue. And I always say to people when they consult with me, look, nobody's going to hold you at fault. If you want to take that baby into the hospital, that is always your decision. I'll tell you, every single time someone I know has taken a baby into the hospital, all they do is they lay the baby on the back, they put a monitor on them. If the antibiotics have already been given, which they usually do, that's all they do. They stop the breast milk, they don't give vitamin C. And in fact, I've got one case that was so dramatic, I just want to talk about it briefly, where these parents contacted me. Their very young infant, I think he was slightly less than 2 months old, was in the hospital in California. His name is George, and I get a birthday card every year from this family now. And George was laid on his back, and the hospital staff was insinuating that the baby wouldn't survive, and so the parents contacted me at first. I was like, I want nothing to do with this whatsoever. And then they kind of broke me down, and I helped them. And I said, look, what you need to do is get the baby off of his back. You need to pick him up, start moving him around, get that mucus moving, and start swabbing some vitamin C inside the baby's mouth. Well, within 48 hours, that baby had turned around so quickly that he was out the door and home. And now I get a birthday card from either early on, it was from the parents, and sometimes even little gifts. So, these are the kind of dramatic things you can see just by giving vitamin C and getting that mucus and treating the baby's body properly. And that's what I go through specifically in my article.
That's fascinating. Now, Suzanne, you're talking about breastfeeding being vitally important. So what if the mother has stopped breastfeeding, the baby is, say, 18 months or whatever? Is raw milk okay, or is it not?
Oh, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that. But look, if you have an 18-month that has whooping cough, I'm no longer really worried that baby's going to die. It'd be really unusual for an 18-month-old healthy baby, especially if they've had breast milk in the past. So I just think it's really for the younger infants, because you want to colonize the gut appropriately. And that's really what a lot of breast milk does. It colonizes the gut, which makes the gut, kind of the cells adhere better and create a firm barrier with good mucus on the lining, and then you're better able to deal with the normal endotoxin that occurs, as well as all the endotoxin that baby's probably swallowing from the whooping cough bacteria. So 18 months old, I'm just not worried about a baby dying. I mean, the hardest babies to treat actually are not babies. The hardest children to treat are the ones that are kind of walking around now, the 4-year-olds that have a mind of their own, or even 7-year-olds. That can be really difficult because, if they're accustomed to having, bread and cereal and, regular standard American diet, and the parents say, well, that's all they'll eat. It's like, those are the ones that are really difficult to treat because, you're chasing them around with vitamin C and they're wanting to eat junk food all the time and not drink appropriate amounts of water. Whereas the younger ones you can pretty much control really well, especially infants. So infant over 2 months old, I tend really not to worry about the survival rate if they're using the protocol properly.
So food is critical. And in our day, it was steamy showers, steamy rooms, yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that because that can help to some degree if you have dry mucous membranes, if it's in the winter. Some people will put just a little tiny bit of lavender into a humidifier, not into what are they called? The oil, forget what they're diffusers. Not so much that, because that might be a bit too strong and it could actually cause the airway to react, but just a little bit of lavender into a humidifier can be really nice for that. But yeah, steamy showers, a lot of times you just have to try different things, and because your child might not respond the same way as anybody else's. And I find that that's true even with the vitamin C treatment, as different babies respond differently to different doses and have different issues.
And you may not be able to comment on this as a doctor, but I just want to warn people what we've seen with the measles recently and now the whooping cough. It seems an awful coincidence to me that the measles kids and the so-called measles kids and the whooping cough, they're all dying in hospital. There is something dangerous about going to hospital in this day and age, which is terribly awful to say. But my message is please don't go unless you absolutely have to. And if you have to, you need to take some representation with you, legal representation with you.
Yeah, and I would really love it if CHD could locate the parents of these children and find out if we can get the medical records to look at them. I know that they will be highly revealing.
Yeah, but the weird thing about this, and our science team are on that for sure, but this weirdest thing about it, it's like they don't exist. I'm sure you do exist if you're watching this now, but we need to hear your story. It is vitally important. If you are truly unvaccinated and your baby was and your mother is, and three of that situation happened, we need to hear about that. It's as important as the death from the DTaP.
That's right. I suspect that they were not vaccinated because they were too young. That's what I think probably happened. And then the hospital did what they do.
Or like with all the other cases, unvaccinated means they just didn't have the latest one. These people are just, the mainstream news are disgraceful liars. And that is what's causing the problem. They're putting such a fear, like they did with the measles, and people are running around desperate to get these vaccines because they don't want to die like these supposed girls in Texas and now the Louisiana children. And it's simply not true. We know the Texas girls isn't true, Suzanne.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, the mainstream media is what most people watch. And so that's why it's very important that people who are watching this now to share it and never shut up about it, because they don't actually care what we're doing here because we're such a small amount of people compared to the masses that are watching mainstream media. So we have to make our masses bigger.
Yeah, can we just talk about the shedding for a second? So if you get the Tdap or whatever, say you're a granny, and you've been told you have to get the Tdap, otherwise you cannot visit your grandchild. You, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is you could actually make the brand new newborn actually sick.
Okay, so it's not like a COVID shot, and it's not like a live vaccine. So your vaccine itself will not do that because it's just dead particles of the vaccine and make you sick. But how it can actually affect the baby is that if that person that's been vaccinated numerous times later encounters the bacteria, which is pretty much ubiquitous everywhere, then they're not going to respond to it in a normal fashion through the lungs. They're going to be like one of those baboons that I showed you that harbors the bacteria at the lung surface and can cough it out asymptomatically and give it to that baby. So that's how it would shed. But have to pick it up somewhere else because of its inferior immunity that was induced by a vaccine and then give it to that baby.
So why does a young mum tell the granny that she's got to get the DTaP to protect the baby? How is that going to protect her newborn baby? If
it doesn't protect, no, it doesn't protect the baby. It does the actual opposite. And it means that you're probably not going to have a babysitter for very long because you're going to kill granny, because they're basically telling them that every time a baby is born in the family that they have to get another shot. So poor granny. Granny's got to stop. Grannies have to stop. And so many of them are blackmailed and they go and they do it anyway. And they send me emails or ring me up and tell me how sick they got afterwards. So that's one way that you can lose your part of your village who's going to be doing your babysitting, is just keep jabbing them like that. And they're doing the same thing with the COVID shots.
So here's another scenario for you. What would you recommend? So say a young mum's pregnant. She's got two older children who are at school, because we all know from school they bring back stuff. And she's got this she's got a newborn baby. The problem is those school age kids bring back all kinds of crap and pass it on. So would it be sensible to not how long do you keep that newborn baby? I don't know. Do you not send those kids to school? I mean, what's the deal here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem because, as evidenced by the slide that I showed you in the pre-vaccine era versus the post-vaccine with all those pictures, is that now those children that are school age, they're if they haven't experienced the whooping cough before that baby was born and have durable life, at least 30-year immunity, then they stand the chance to pick it up, usually from a vaccinated child, and bring it home to that baby. And it's a problem. And I've had this happen. I've had pregnant mothers call me up, panicked because they're going to have a baby soon, and their kids are at home with whooping cough. And my answer is like, I'm sorry, but the children have to go live somewhere else, or you have to go live, preferably you leave that house, because God only knows what's sitting around on the surfaces there. So I try to do my best to get them for, until they're completely, and the antibiotics, like I said, you cannot rely on the antibiotics to stop the shedding of somebody who's already infected. It's not 100% by far. So in your situation, look, you can't keep your kids hostage, your school age kids, and say, I'm going to homeschool you and never let you around anybody else. But I think it's pretty much good wisdom to keep a baby out of circulation as much as possible for 2 months, because after 2 months, that's when, their lungs are mature enough to be able to cope. It's not ideal to have whooping cough at 2 months. I'd much rather see it, 8 months or older. But at 2 months, then, so keep them off airplanes, keep them off trains. Don't bring them into the malls. Stop going to your coffee events. I don't know what else to say, but we've created this situation because of vaccination, and now you're stuck with it. I don't have a perfect answer for it.
Now, and when does the immune system kick into to what you said, 18 months, you're not so worried about it? Is that when the immune system has another boost?
Well, it's a very slow process. So what happens when babies are born, and this has all been very well documented and outlined in my infant immunity series that you can watch on Odyssey, is that it's always been presumed that babies are born without adequate immune systems. Well, that's not true. Babies' immune systems can respond to just about anything early on. But it's at a cost later in life. So the ideal is to have the baby be born, to have the mother's healthy immune system being transferred into that baby through that mother's breast milk, to have antigens from food being transferred into that baby, getting it used to what's in the world, because what's most important is to learn what not to respond to, believe it or not. Because if we responded to all the antigens that were around, then the baby would have autoimmune diseases and would die. So we have to learn which bacteria to respond to, which viruses, which are invasive, which are not invasive. And so over time, how I look at it and how other vaccine scientists have looked at it is that the immune system of a baby is intentionally clamped down by the divine creator. And that over time, as the introduction continues and as the breast milk changes according to the age of a baby, it's a miraculous thing. And so those clamps are released slowly, slowly, slowly. And then by about 2 years, that immune system is functioning more by itself. I think it's ideal to keep breastfeeding as long as possible and as exclusively as possible, at least 6 months. And then you have to, test food and see what's causing a reaction, what's not. But best thing is to give food that the mother has eaten, and then give that to the baby. Healthy food, of course. So that's really what happens with the baby's immune system. It's not that it's unable to respond, but that it's purposely held down while it's learning about the world. It's kind of like, wisdom. Wisdom is shutting your mouth and looking around and observing and listening. Well, the immune system has its own way of doing that. And then after you learn enough, then maybe you say something. And so that's the equivalent of what happens. And I detail that in my infant immunity series on my Odyssey channel. If you can't find that, go to my X channel, DRSUZANNEH7. That's my X channel. And at the very top, I've pinned my Odyssey channel, and you can go and look at the infant immunity series there. Very important, because I go through the gestational time, I go through the birth, and then I go through the first 2 years and what happens with the immune system.
Dr. Suzanne, just quickly want to ask you, the doctors will say to the pregnant women, if you get the Tdap, you will protect your unborn baby from whooping cough. Is that a true statement or untrue statement?
It is untrue statement, and it's backed up by numerous references in the 10th anniversary edition of Dissolving Illusions, some of which I've brought up today, that actually, and this is all kind of newer information, that when that mother is vaccinated, what we now know is that that actually creates that situation of original antigenic sin in the baby's called germinal centers, B cells, so that they're not going to be able to respond adequately normally like they would if they were not stimulated by a vaccine in utero. And that's been shown in mice, it's been shown in petri dishes, and it's been shown in human blood as well.
And not to mention that we have done stories of babies that have died following the mother being given the Tdap while pregnant, and then the baby dies, and then she has to deliver a stillborn baby. So that could happen to you. So I want people to know the truth that these mothers just didn't know and still don't know because of censorship, because of everything else.
Correct.
Right. Let's go through again how people can follow you. It's very important you follow Dr. Suzanne Humphries on X if you're on X, or I don't know if you're banned from Facebook. I'm banned from Facebook.
No, I just don't use it very much. I do. My Dr. Suzanne Humphries page on Facebook is still there. There's still a lot of information on there and about 100,000 followers, but I've got more on X. So it's at DRSUZANNEH7. There you go, right there. And that's me. And you can go to drsuzanne.net, which is my very ailing, sick website, or you can go to dissolvingillusions.com, which is a much better website.
Yeah, and that book needs to be given to every doctor, family member that you know, because everything you need to know about the history of vaccines is in that book. So, right, everybody, listen, what we're going to do now is we're going to play Carrie Bundy's story. It's very important that you listen to this because, like Dr. Suzanne Humphries said, she had these two beautiful children. Mason was a beautiful little baby, born premature. Well, you'll hear it in a minute. Forced by the pediatrician to take the DTaP, and the baby died. And then, of course, she had Ollie afterwards, and Ollie was totally unvaccinated, and he had whooping cough, and he's here today. So it could not be plainer than Carrie Bundy's story. Dr. Suzanne Humphries, thank you for all your work, for all the work that went behind the presentation today. And please, to our viewers, please share this with all the young mums. It's very important because the fear of the media is going rampant right now. It's only going to get worse, along with the measles. Thank you for being on this morning, Dr. Suzanne Humphries.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
I'm Carrie Bundy, and this is Bryce. He was born totally normal. He was happy. He was healthy. And this was his newborn picture. So these were taken the day he came home, 3 days old. And he was very alert, very aware.
How premature was he?
5 weeks.
Wow, 5 weeks.
And he didn't have a NICU stay. He was our only child that did not have a NICU stay, which was shocking because he was the smallest, earliest. So he got his first round of shots at 2 months old. And that round of shots changed him right away. He went from a normal baby. He was our third, so we knew what normal meant. You know, babies are fussy sometimes, but he started screaming 23 hours a day. He had just been hospitalized for RSV. And when we went in, I said, I don't feel comfortable with him being vaccinated because he's just been so sick. I think that we need to wait. And the pediatrician looked at Bryce and I and said, if you don't vaccinate your son, who was born at 35 weeks and is a premature baby, you're signing his death certificate for this whooping cough.
So let's get this clear. The pediatrician said if you don't vaccinate your child...
You're essentially signing his death certificate, which was very ironic.
Are you both there?
Yeah. Because I didn't want to do it, and Bryce was like, we have to do this to keep him safe. I mean, the doctor knew who to target of the two of us.
Because the moms always question everything first, and the dads just kind of go with what everybody else is doing. So
well, I mean, I was more like you. I just went with the medical.
Right.
I just can't get over that. So they cannot get over the pediatrician coming out with that line. If you don't vaccinate him, you'll be signing his death certificate.
Right.
That's tragic. Okay, so then what happened?
So he got vaccinated. This was March 1st. And the next few days, he was really calm, which was weird because he'd been screaming for 2 straight months.
They wouldn't make eye contact.
And
he
we have
wouldn't look at
videos
you.
of
He
that.
wouldn't respond to you.
He just kind of looked at the ceiling, and anytime you tried to get in his way, he would just look around you.
So the 2 days of that.
Yeah.
And then
It
what
was
happened?
it was 3. It was March 4th. He actually had the best day that he'd had in 2 months. He was smiling. He met my mom's best friend that morning. And we have pictures that day of him sitting quietly with Ella, who was 6 at the time, and just learning to reading books. And that's the last picture I have, because we went up to a room and I walked up to kiss him goodnight. It was 12:06 in the morning, and I bent over. It was dark in our room, and we just had a nightlight. And I kissed his cheek, and it was like an ice cube. And I just started screaming to Bryce, he's dead, he's dead. And everything that I know how to do CPR. I'm certified in this. I just stepped back and screamed. And Bryce walked in and just grabbed him and ran. And I'm like, where are you going? As I'm chasing him down the stairs, and he's like, I'm taking him to the doctor at midnight. And he was gone in his Camaro, no car seat, nothing, just had Mason on his lap.
So I grabbed him, I get in the car, I'm trying to do CPR while I'm driving, and it's raining, and I just pulled to the emergency room, and ran and said that he's dead. And they started working on him, and it was probably about an hour before we got somebody to carry so she could leave our other kids to come to the emergency room to be with me. And there was nothing since they did epinephrine, they gave him all these shots, and his body was just swelling from all the medicine they were trying to give him to get him going again. It was the first time that this hospital had ever had to deal with anything like this. And we had to tell them to stop because he was gone. And they didn't want to stop because they had never experienced that before as a hospital. So Carrie had to be the parents, like, he's gone.
When Bryce was at the hospital and I got there, I did not arrive to my husband. I arrived to a man that was crumpled up on the ground, sobbing, not talking to me. We were surrounded by police, separating us, questioning us. Did you ever hurt your child? And it's just, I saw Mason and I knew he was dead. I knew he wasn't coming back. And I knew every time I looked at him again that there's nobody in there. That's just his body, and there's nothing there. And right now I need my husband. And so he went home and he slept, and I woke up and had to tell my 6-year-old why her brother wasn't here anymore. And we slept on the couch, and when she woke up, I just told her that something happened. We didn't know what happened, and Mason died last night, and he's never going to come back.
Well, then we had to watch our 1-year-old look for him.
Right, because Lucy was 18 months old.
She was looking in the bouncy seat. She didn't understand. She was so little.
And my parents removed the rest of the stuff. Like my dad, who was with the kids when I finally went to the hospital, he moved everything into Mason's room and shut the door. So like the swing, the diapers, everything that was his was no longer there. I didn't want it there. I was like, I don't want to see any of it when I get home. And Lucy was looking for even the swing. She was calling his name. She called him Bubba, trying to say brother. And she's like, Bubba, Bubba, looking everywhere. And you just cannot tell, a baby that's under 2 years old, like, what happened. So she doesn't remember him, but she knows of him because she's heard us talk about him. This isn't like a stillbirth or a miscarriage, which is equally devastating, but like we have a year where Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, there was a child in these pictures with us that the next year was gone.
There's no words really of that. I mean,
No, there's not.
I'm sorry.
And it was the week that he died. It was the day of his funeral that someone said, had he just been vaccinated? And I said, F you for even asking that. How could you ask that? You're asking me if I did it? If I caused him to die? And it was. And I think that the reason that there isn't as much said about parents that vaccinate and their child dies is we have this stigma and we have all of this guilt, because essentially if we would have known better, this never would have happened and we'd still have a child.
What's your message to parents people that are just thinking about becoming parents? What would you say to them?
You just have to educate yourself, because you can't rely on somebody else to tell you the information, that's what we did, because we didn't know any better. And you just have to have an informed choice.
And with Oliver, who is our son that was born 2 years later, he actually got whooping cough at 1 year old. So the very vaccine that Mason was given that killed him was was preventing the disease that our next son had. And they make you think this child's going to die. And he was fine. And so it was even harder to see that this disease that I had been so scared of, that I didn't listen to my intuition, was not as scary as I'd been led to believe.
And he's still here today.
Right.
Stronger than
Right.
ever before.
And he's very healthy.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.